If you haven't seen my first video on the PDW9, then go check out my unboxing and external overview video, and I'll link that in the comments below. It's time to tear down and dive into the internals of the ICS CSP PDW9 S3 rifle. To pop the rear body pin out, you have to take the stock off first. Punch the pin, hinge the front open, and then enjoy the benefits of ICS's split gearbox design. Pull on the charging handle and grab the upper gearbox. You may have to wiggle it a little bit to get it free. Included is ICS's typical M4 rotary metal hop-up chamber. It's used across their CXP lineup. I've used the stock ICS rotary hop in my other CXP M4, and it's actually a pretty good option for a stock rotary hop unit. Looking at the barrel, we got a 160mm long standard bore barrel with a black finish. With the upper gearbox out, you can see how the electronic blowback system works and how the charging handle integrates into the bolt catch. This rifle also has a quick change spring system, which makes tuning FPS or doing spring swaps a breeze. To remove the spring guide, just stick in any screwdriver or hex head and turn the mark from the diagonal to a 90-degree position to release the spring guide. I mentioned in the unboxing that the Canadian version of this gun comes with a 120 spring. I'm just going to disassemble the upper gearbox to check out the setup up top, and I'll leave the lower gearbox and gears alone. To access the internals in the upper gearbox, remove the 4 gearbox screws and the 2 small screws for the bolt catch plate. The stock internals are ICS's upgraded parts line by Mastermods. This gun includes a Mastermods piston with steel reinforced rack and aluminum piston head. The piston head, being aluminum, is actually super heavy in my opinion, and I always prefer a quality polymer piston head. On the back of the piston, you can see the little nub that acts to engage the electronic blowback system. If you swap to a non-ICS piston, you'll notice that you won't have this nub, which will effectively disable the blowback system. There's a bit of a rattle in the piston head, which is probably due to the bearings from the spring guide system that are under the piston head screw. If you have bearings on your spring guide, you don't need bearings also on the piston head, so you can remove them for lowering the weight and to get rid of the rattle. The black gadget at the top is the other part of the electronic blowback system that transfers the motion from the piston to the bolt plate. The tappet plate is the same as their M4 platform in case you need to replace one. The gearbox shell is slightly radiused, which will help mitigate cracking at edges, although more on that later. A lot of the internals between this gun and other ICS M4 guns should be quite similar, although it may depend if you get the classic ICS internals or the Mastermod internals. We have a Mastermods nozzle that includes an internal O-ring for better sealing. The nozzle is 21mm long, so slightly shorter compared to most V2 and M4 platforms. This is pretty common with ICS setups. This build includes a Mastermod cylinder head with dual O-rings. The cylinder head has a rubber bumper on the front end, which can sometimes be problematic. The rubber bumper at the front end can degrade over time with lots of shots through the rifle, and this can lead a gap at the front end, causing an air leak as the cylinder head moves, or a hammer effect as the cylinder head bounces forward and backward off the gearbox pins or gearbox, breaking it later. We'll have to monitor the performance of the cylinder head and see how this goes. Like every stock gun, you also have tons of grease all over everything right out of the box. The piston head and cylinder mesh really well together with sort of a mushroom-like design. For the parts that we don't see, the ICS gun has MIM pinion and bevel gears at a standard 18:1 gear ratio, and also has 8mm bushings. And of course the S3 trigger and MOSFET system. I'm sure as always it could use a shimming tune-up too, but we're going to leave that for a rainy day. The rifle has a ported brass cylinder. The port is 46mm from the front of the cylinder, which helps tune the volume with such a short barrel. Well, that's pretty much all the internals here checked out. So to reassemble, just go in backwards order from how we took it apart. With it partially assembled here, I'll just demonstrate how the electronic blowback action works by using the piston nub to transfer to the black gadget at the top, which then goes through into the bolt plate. The stock 120 spring was shooting at 1.9 joules, or way too hot for my field limit, so I put in a 110 spring to get about 1.5 to 1.6 joules, or a 100 spring to get about 1.1 to 1.2 joules, depending if I was playing outdoor or indoor airsoft. When you reinsert the spring, just make sure that you twist the back alignment line to be on a diagonal and not lining up with one of the 4 primary axes. When you screw back on the bolt plate, just make sure you don't over tighten the small screws. They only go into plastic and it's very easy to strip that hole. When you drop your barrel and the barrel recoil spring in, you always want to make sure there's a bit of a bounce back. You don't want it to get stuck down. You want to make sure that it pushes back against the upper receiver so that it's fitting tight against your upper gearbox. Before you close the upper and lower, you may need to cycle the gearbox to make sure that the sector gear nut is cycled in the right way to avoid putting tension on the tappet plate as you close the two halves of the gearbox shell. You also want to make sure that you're not seeing any of the sector gear pickup teeth for the piston sticking up and out. Be careful not to pull the trigger as you close the two halves. Sometimes it's just better to disconnect the battery once you have the gears cycled in the right place. ICS built in this wedge shape into the motor base plate to help align the motor and fill the void. The two set pins that secure the motor base plate in place are also quite an innovative design compared to the standard motor base plate screws, and I quite like it. This rifle comes with an EVO 1 35,000 RPM long motor, which is part of ICS's newer line of motors. I couldn't find any more details on the TPA for this motor. I can say the motor magnets are just ferrite, not neodymium. You could tell because it's pretty weak to spin the pinion gear. The motor does have a pretty good sound, pretty good stock speed at 19 rounds per second on an 11.1 volt battery with the stock 18-to-1 gear set. The grip itself seems to have a lot of slop and extra room compared to a normal grip, which might be due to the custom grip angle they went for on the PDW9. I don't know about you guys, but I've been pretty excited for this rifle for a long time, so I'm super stoked to be using it for my new primary outdoor and also indoor games.